Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to the 2021 Public Service Career Expo. My name is Amy Wenson, and I'm with the Mid-America Regional Council. I'm joined today by a panel of experts in the community development field, and we'll be getting to know each of those folks here in just a minute. Really excited that you're joining us. It looks like we've got Allen Village School here, several classrooms, and so welcome. We're glad that you're with us. We will be using the chat box today to ask questions of our presenters, and we want to make this as interactive as possible. So if you've got questions for folks, make sure you drop those in the chat box. And if you are joining us today and you haven't already, make sure you let us know where you're from and how many students are with you so that we can take an opportunity to give you a shout out and also just have a record that you're here today. So we're going to talk a little bit about community development and what that means and what that career choice is all about. So let's talk about that. Community development is exactly that. It's developing a community, and these folks have a planning background. And when we talk about a planning background, it's important to know the different aspects of a community and to put those together in a plan that makes the most sense, the most logical, cohesive structure for your community. We want to make sure that your house isn't built next to a noisy factory where you get woken up every day by big loud banging trucks and those types of things, or maybe that we don't put parks right next to a very busy highway. We don't want children playing where there's trucks that are zooming by. So we want to have a plan and have something that makes a lot of sense for our community, because it really does affect the quality of life of our residents. So we want to make sure that we put together the best plan that we can, and that's what these folks do, working hard every day. Maybe you've done, maybe you've played a video game where you've had to build a city before, and that's what these folks get to do as part of their jobs every day. So we're going to hear from them, and I'll just go ahead and start by some introductions. I'll let them introduce themselves to you, starting with Catherine.
Hey everybody, my name is Catherine. I am a planner with the city of Leawood, Kansas. I've been in this position for about just under a year and a half. Before that, I was a planner in Burlington, Iowa. And I got my undergraduate in geography from Kansas State, and then also got my master's in regional community planning, also from K-State.
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine. David.
Good morning. My name is David Gress. I am the Economic Development Director for the city of Raymore, Missouri. I've been in the community development field for about 6 years, and in my current position for about 2 of those. Before that, I was the city's planner, and so having that knowledge in this position helps out quite a bit. Happy to be here, and I appreciate everyone's interest in community development.
Thank you. Good morning, Chris. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Good morning. My name is Chris Huey. I am the Permits Division Manager for the City Planning Development Department in Kansas City, Missouri. I've been in the field about 15 years, with KCM about 3, and in my current position about 7 months.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. Good morning, Ricky. Can you say hello?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Ricky Sanchez, and I'm also a planner at the city of Leawood, so I work here with Catherine. And I've been here for almost 4 years. Yeah, and I'm really happy to be here and talk to all you guys.
Great, thank you. Okay, so in the video, it talked a little bit about agilities, and agilities are your strengths and weaknesses as it relates to career interest or to work. So identifying your agilities can be an important exercise as you start looking for a career path and trying to decide what you want to do in the future. That 10-minute free assessment tool is available on our website. It is called the Agile Work Profiler, or Agilities. And one of the top common agilities in community development is inspecting. So Chris, can you talk a little bit about inspecting and how that skill works in your role?
Absolutely. So inspecting is very important in our role, especially in the permits division and really through community development as a whole. We inspect and review plans as they're submitted to us for code compliance with general life safety aspects, but also for any additional aesthetic or design requirements that the city standards expect. Additionally, once those plans are approved and sent out to the field through an issued permit, our inspectors who are actually doing the legitimate field work are inspecting projects as they're progressing, providing reports, explaining to contractors what needs to be changed or corrected, and then at the very end certifying that the building's safe and habitable for any occupant.
So at a very basic level, the permits that your group manages are for things related to construction. And so if I want to build a deck on my home, or I want to add a room on the side, or a bigger garage, or if I want to build a skyscraper in downtown, so I'm going to come to your department, and that's how you interface with the public. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I can speak for KCMO. We've structured our department to be kind of all-inclusive under one department. So any zoning entitlements is in our development management division. Any permitting issuance comes through my division. And then we have a specialized plans review division for the actual detailed analysis from a construction code perspective.
So if someone wants to make a change, you're there to make sure that they do it safely. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, yes.
Good. Okay. So Catherine, you're relatively new in your career. Let's talk a little bit about how you got to be a planner. Did you know early on that planning was the way that you wanted to go?
I had no idea what planning was actually until about halfway through college. So I knew I wanted to work with people and cities. Started out with my geography degree at K-State. And then, it was time to figure out what I wanted to do for a job. And so, it was hard to, it seemed like my only option was to be a geographer or a GIS technician. And while those sounded interesting, I wasn't sure that was what I wanted to do. So I took a career assessment through our on-campus career center. And planning was one of the things that came up due to my interests and skill set that I provided on the assessment. And rather than just switching majors, they said, hey, take a class. It'll count towards your credits. See if you like it. And I knew almost instantly that it was what I wanted to do. And so I continued taking classes in it. And the more that I took, the more interested I got. And so decided right after undergrad to go ahead and pursue my master's and get that all done at once. And so it just seemed like every class that I took, provided a wide variety of the scope of planning, and just made me more interested. So
that's fantastic. So it sounds like if you're kind of lost or maybe not certain which direction you want to go, that there are some tools available, and maybe taking an assessment or some kind of a questionnaire even can kind of lead you in a way that would help you identify those strengths and kind of lead you to your career. And that happened for you. It's great that you get to work with your passion. Ricky, she talked a little bit about geography, which makes me think about maps, which makes me think about even just the map that you have behind you. Can you talk a little bit about the maps and how they have the information contained in them and how you use those in your job every day?
Sure. So geography plays a huge part in what we do every day. I mean, from neighborhood boundaries to the city boundary to, every which way. And so it's important that we know not only the location of it, but, the analytics of it. What are the demographics? What are the, who are these people that are actually living in here? And so maps do play a big role in it. And so a little bit of it is, a math kind of formed type analysis that you're doing. But on the other hand, you want to make it look good so that people read it and it's easy and legible to pass out. And if somebody get something in their hand, they're able to look at it, understand it clearly, and then everyone's kind of on the same page. And so it is a big part of what we do. Is it kind of gets back to this communication. It's being able to communicate things easily, whether that's communicating verbally or that's communicating through pictures and maps and things like that. So, but yeah, maps do play a big role in what we do.
So you take the information that you have in the maps and you really have to tell a story. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, very fair to say.
Interesting. Okay, well, David, you have kind of the early part of the story. You work with businesses and groups who may want to either locate in your community, or can you talk a little bit about your role and how you're kind of in the what I would think of like the early stages of planning?
Yeah, so a big part of my job is attracting and bringing new businesses to the city, or working with existing ones to expand their business. And so I always like to say that everybody probably on this call has thought once about in their own city they live in that, man, it'd be really nice if we had this, or Raymore really needs one of these. And so the cool thing about community development and being in economic development specifically is that all of us together are kind of responsible for making those projects come to fruition and make them a reality. So, reaching out to businesses that are here and making sure they are having their needs met, and, communicating all the good things about Raymore or whatever city that you're in to folks that are outside of that community to help them know all the good things about it, are really important to really telling the story about your community, as you just said, and helping add to that story by bringing new businesses and new residents in to be a part of it.
Awesome. We have a question in the chat, David. I think that you'd be a great one to address this. So the student question is, how do you know what they're going to make or build, or what they need you to do?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it definitely varies from project to project. Every project needs are quite a bit different, but it all starts with the conversation about either what does the city want to see, or what does this developer want to bring to the city. Two totally different conversations. They can go in totally different directions, but a big piece of that is having that conversation early on, so that the city communicates their expectations to a developer, and that developer knows kind of what that process looks like very clearly. There's a lot of moving parts to every project. You're dealing with inspectors, you're dealing with permits in Chris's office, planners with Ricky and Catherine, and then you're also dealing with the other side of the equation, which is the developer. And so they've got their own staff members that they're coordinating with. And so the communication between all of those parties is really what makes those projects happen.
Fantastic. So in that idea, Christopher, if I have a cupcake making business and I am selling cupcakes to my friends out of my home, and then I say, you know what, I really need a bigger kitchen. I see this building kind of in my neighborhood or area that I want to move my business and start there. I would approach your group, your team. I'd come to you, and what would you tell me?
Well, we initially start off kind of working with the planners, so like Kathy and Ricky, to make sure that the zoning is compliant, so that kind of a food manufacturing kind of artisanal use is okay in that area. Once we kind of get past that, we go into the building code and fire code. Since you're creating a product to sell, there's also gets the health department involved, so because someone's going to eat it, so there's proper food handling techniques, temperature controls and stuff like that. So we start pulling together what's kind of the general expectations for a project like this in the location it's at. More than likely, you would hire a design team to kind of draw up exactly what you need, and then we'd review that for city code compliance. And then once that's all kind of done, you get your contractor the permits, and they're off construction.
And then the cupcakes start rolling. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a question in the chat. Ricky, if you can answer this, what type of degree is required for planning or development?
Sure. So there are a multitude of degrees that you can get that can kind of lead you into the planning field. I know people with geography degrees, anything in the social sciences type stuff. Sometimes they'll take a class in it or something like that, and they'll kind of know what planning is. And so it kind of all rolls into rolling into what planning is. And so I know Chris, David, and we all three have a degree from UMKC in urban planning and design. However, Catherine, she got hers in geography and then got her master's in planning. And so everyone just kind of like goes, as long as you're in the social sciences, you may hear about planning or something like that. But I mean, I know from my own personal experience, I started in engineering and I learned what that was, didn't like it. So then I moved over to the architecture, didn't necessarily like that. So then I moved into planning. And so it kind of just, you learn about different things as you kind of learn what you like and what you don't like.
That's great. Catherine, there's a question in the chat from Allen Village School. Can you work in planning and development in a city or state that you were not born in? Oh, can't hear you. I lost your sound. No. All right, we'll have somebody else answer that one. David, you want to answer that question for me?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It's definitely not a requirement to be born in the city or state that you want to work in. It helps to know as much as you can about the city you're working in, and so that's something to think about. But you can always learn new cities by living in them or just reading about them. But definitely not a requirement to to be born in that state to want to work there.
So these would be skills. Yes, I can hear you now. Do you have something to add, Catherine?
I do actually. I've done this. So my first job out of school was in a totally different state that I'd never lived in or was born in. I actually felt like it really kind of gave me a different perspective on my job and on, a different lifestyle. And it actually really helped me with the job I have today. So I don't want to say I would recommend it necessarily, but it's definitely a good tool of growth to go outside of where you're from.
So as a planner, you could take your skill set and move to another community. If let's say your spouse needed to transfer out of state, but the skills and the job that you've learned, the experience that you have, you could take that to another community and work. You're all nodding your heads. Yes.
Cities may be a little bit different, so you will have a bit of a learning curve, but the nuts and bolts are the same most everywhere you go. So
great. Chris, there's a question in the chat. What is the part you like most about your job?
A couple things. There's definitely not a one-size-fits-all project. They're all very unique. The only time it gets kind of repetitive is if there's just minor repairs and stuff like that. So the water heater replacements, those are kind of, rinse and repeat. But any type of new construction, they're all very unique, independent. There's site conditions that are very different. So getting those specifics kind of ironed out and into the hands of the contractors is really important, so that they know the expectations going into the construction cycle. Also, I like that in my kind of new role, I'm a supervisor, so I get to help kind of like shape some from a broader range, more department policy, so it can work on helping some bigger initiatives throughout the city kind of move forward and kind of, can do the art of continuous improvement for the city.
Awesome. Same question, Ricky, to you. What's the best part about your job, or what's rewarding to you?
Yeah, so I definitely think that talking to people, that's one of my favorite parts of my job, and being able to communicate with people all across the board. And you're talking to engineers, talking to architects, but you're also talking to, your neighbor next door, and they want to know about the community. They want to know about projects that are going on. And so that's definitely one of the funnest parts, is talking to everyone. But, it's very rewarding to actually see, you get plans in and you're reviewing them, and you get them through a bunch of departments like Chris's and David's and all that stuff. And eventually you see a building go up, and you see people interacting with that building. You see people going in and out. And so that's probably one of the most rewarding things, is seeing something that you saw come across your desk is now a building and people are using it.
Fantastic. That is interesting. So you've been involved from the project from the time that it was just an idea or a piece of paper even, and then someday you're going to see actually bricks and mortar and to be able to go get a shake at that Shake Shack that you were involved in, right?
Yep, exactly.
Exactly. Okay, a great question here. David, I'll let you take this one. Is there community development work outside of local government?
Yeah, absolutely. I think each one of us has talked about here, there's two sides to almost every project. There's the city or the local government that's kind of in charge of reviewing the proposals, or in some cases even proposing projects, depending on what the city is looking at. But like I said, in every project, there's the city. There's also the private sector, which can be private developers, architects, or other private land use planners that play a huge role in putting together the projects that cities review. There's pros and cons to both. I think definitely with the public sector, where we're all at, you've got a pretty regimented schedule, 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, with the exception of a couple evenings where you may have to stick around for a late night meeting. But in the private sector, you've got probably a little more flexibility in your schedule, but you also tend to work probably longer hours trying to meet deadlines for city review meetings and things like that. But it's definitely not, community development isn't strictly limited to just city government or local government. There's a lot of different roles that you could be involved in to be a part of this field.
Awesome. Here's a great question from Eisenhower Middle School. And Chris, I think that you'd be perfect for this one. How do you know that people do their projects and that they're done correctly to code?
Well, there are clear expectations in the city code. The city adopts what we call the International Building Code every few years. Most cities in the metro adopt the same code. There are some local amendments that have to be done based on the context of the city, but those are pretty straightforward for the most part. If the contractors are familiar, they have the proper certifications or education and some experience, nothing is usually out of expectation by any means. Obviously, there are certain situations that pop up. There's special review processes for those. Also, there's with any permit issuance, there's a high expectation of follow-up for inspections. So if a contractor pulls a permit but never calls an inspection, there is no certification that they can get to say the building's safe to occupy because we don't have proof of that. So they may have to actually undo work to get a inspection passed, and then allows them to kind of redo the work and complete the project appropriately. That thankfully is kind of rare for the most part. Most contractors kind of know the expectations and can kind of follow those city processes accordingly.
Thank you for that answer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Ricky, here's a question. I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm not going to ask you what you make, but would you say that the wages for your line of work are competitive? And can you talk a little bit kind of about the benefits of maybe working in the public sector? What kind of other additional compensation type benefits you might receive?
Sure. So you will, as a city planner, it's easy to say that you'll make, I don't know, a comfortable middle class wage. And so that's a pretty broad way of putting it. And so, you're not going to get rich being a city planner, but it's definitely gratifying. And you do work with, developers and architects. And so you do get the life experiences that you really value a lot. And so on the private side, it may be a different story. I do know some planners that work really long hours and, they do make a little bit more money. But it's kind of the work-live balance that I think a lot of us have chosen. And so, but yeah, it ranges. And then, cities, they budget for different things. And, if planning is a high importance for them, they may bump up those pays for some planners. And if they, think that, well, planning isn't, we're pretty built out now, we really don't need a lot of planners, or then they may, bump that down. So it kind of depends on the community that you want to work in and what type of work you want to do, and then what they're willing to pay for it.
And would you also say that working in the public sector, you have paid holidays, that you have vacation time, you've got sick leave, you've got medical insurance, that there are other things that you can kind of count on in terms of some job security, that would be a benefit?
Yeah, and I would say that job security is kind of a big thing when you're on the public side. On the private side, you're kind of grinding to get all these projects, and there's a possibility that for a month you don't get any projects, and so that's kind of a hit to your pocketbook there. But on this side, it's pretty consistent.
So maybe on the private side, it's more about making a profit, or more about a business has gotta turn over and get money basically. And on your side, you're a little bit more of like the rule enforcer, a little bit more of a regulatory agency, and a little bit more of it's more guaranteed. It's steady. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's pretty fair to say.
All right, Chris, there's a question in the chat from Allen Village School. What's the average time length of a project? So from start to finish, is there an average time? Oh, can't hear you. Are you muted? Nope.
Yeah, there we go. Is that better?
There we go. Yes.
Sorry
better,
about that.
No problem.
So there's not a direct for any one thing. There are some averages and expectations. So if you're building a skyscraper in downtown, you probably have a at least 3, if not 6 month entitlement process going through Planning Commission and City Council. Not to mention all the preliminary drawings your design team is putting up front before that even starts. And then the construction process could take a few years once it gets approved. If you're doing a simple rehab to a house, you could probably do almost over-the-counter permits where you're in and out in one day, and then your construction time window is usually, maybe a couple weeks to a couple months. So just depends on the scope and scale of the project. But we do have defined processes and try to set expectations as best we can for these projects. Obviously, each one's a little unique, so those have some flexibility. But those are some kind of bookends to the scale question.
That's a good answer, because projects could be smaller. It could be a skyscraper in downtown, as I know you're working on some big projects. And recently you got to work on a reuse of a project. Can you tell us a little bit about that building and how it's being reused?
Absolutely. So I don't know if you can kind of see on the wall behind me, there's a plan on the wall for the Lyric Opera in downtown Kansas City. That was a historic theater in the city. It's been there, I don't even remember how many years, but it's definitely on the historic districts registry. Unfortunately, it kind of outgrown its lifespan. So the YMCA came in, purchased the building, and did a major renovation / rehabilitation of the building. They kept the historical facade, but they did demo the back 2/3 of the building. So while it's not a perfect historic rehabilitation, they did maintain a lot of the historic facade character. And then on the back side is more of a modern expression of the YMCA. The benefit is that we haven't had a giant YMCA like this in the downtown area for several decades, so it's definitely been kind of a bonus to the community.
That's awesome. We were talking about how community development impacts quality of life. When you're able to preserve the historic aspect of a building like that, especially, our parents and grandparents who may have visited that facility, that it means a lot to people to be able to see, did you see what they've done with this building? But yet they've kept some of those historic features. So that's really important. Thank you for that. David, you're kind of on the early stages of planning. You kind of get in on the ideas or even the recruitment of folks who might have ideas for your community. Can you talk to us a little bit about the tools that you use and how you approach your work?
Yeah, communication is definitely pretty critical in trying to attract people to your city. And so I do use a lot of technology, whether that's design programs, Adobe programs. I think we talked about GIS and mapping softwares earlier. Anything that you can really put together to communicate the story about your community and all the good things about it that the developers want to know about. I spend a lot of time putting together what I consider marketing materials for a city, highlighting all the different projects that have been approved recently or constructed, putting it together, making sure that it's, as Ricky said, easy to read and fun to look at. Developers and restaurants and grocery stores, they get a lot of inquiries from cities across the country, and so you're constantly trying to find ways to make your city stand out, which is hard sometimes because there's a lot of exciting things going on around the Kansas City area. So it's kind of a friendly competition, but you're always trying to position your city as kind of the next best business decision for who you're trying to attract in my line of work.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Chris, there's a question in the chat I think would be great for you. So as planners, can you help decide which buildings need to be destroyed? Since you work in Kansas City, Missouri, there's homes or commercial buildings. There's a lot of buildings that are really old and maybe dilapidated, maybe don't meet code anymore. So what role does the city have in identifying structures that maybe should be destroyed?
So really I think our initial goal is to save as many structures as possible. Really, that's kind of the intent, is to maintain that character and kind of context. Unfortunately, there are some owners who do let their properties get beyond the ability to be rehabbed. The city does have a dangerous building team. They go out and inspect buildings which have sadly gone past that point of no repair. If the owner doesn't make necessary repairs, we do file a complaint through the court system. If the judge agrees, we do issue a demolition permit and demolish the building. That's unfortunate. We try to avoid that at all costs, but unfortunately, that is some of the unfortunate side of the job. There is those situations where that's just the only available option. Again, there are certain times when a building may have had an internal structural collapse, and we, from our inspections on the exterior, we couldn't see it. But once we see the collapse, well, then there's, a roof damage or something else that's made the structure unsafe. And it's either a waiting game to get it fixed, or really it just has to be removed, unfortunately.
I understand. That's good information. Ricky, here's one for you, because you talked about how you like talking to people. Do you have to deal with complaints from people who don't like the plan?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, not everyone has the same opinion about things, and that's just kind of all over the board, no matter what topic you're discussing. And so, say you're getting a drive-through McDonald's right across the street from you. Some people really like McDonald's and they think that that's great. Some people don't. And so it just kind of depends on what the neighborhood is, what the neighborhood feel is, what the community's like, and what the city expectations are. And so, yeah, and unfortunately, that is one part of the job, and that's another part of communicating. Being able to, some people just come in real hot and they want to, complain. It's like, hey, this is the process. This is why we're letting you know. This is, and so unfortunately, yeah, we do get, some complaints, but it's kind of up to the planner to kind of work things out and kind of get things moving forward.
Okay, good to know. It's also important that you help people understand the process. So if something comes to you, then it's not automatic that it gets approved, and it's not really up to you. You don't decide, yes, this can move forward. You have an elected body or an appointed body, and then an elected body. So it moves through a process to where it has to go before the Planning Commission, for example, and they have to review all of the facets of the plan. They have to see if it meets our codes, meets our setback guidelines, if it meets our comprehensive plans. So it's not, you don't get to rubber stamp things or to push things forward. And there are a lot of opportunities for input along the way. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, definitely. These people were elected by their citizens, and, they get to voice, for their constituents. And so they will come to us and say, hey, this is what we're looking for. This is what we want. But ultimately, it's your part as a professional planner. All of us are professional planners. And so although we work for the city, that's our first goal, is to plan for the community. It's to give our perspective on what is good, what's a good planning practice for this project. And so that may work with what they're wanting, or may be the total opposite of what they think. And so that's kind of the politics that comes into when you work with a city and you're a professional planner.
Here's a question for Catherine from the chat, and this is interesting. I did run across this when I worked for the city of Lee Summit. Can you move buildings after they've been built? You're early in your career, so maybe you haven't seen this very much, but I know it is something that planners deal with.
Yeah, so it's could depend on quite a few things, and I'm sure Chris would have to, do permits for this and all sorts of different things. I think first it's going to depend, on the condition of the structure. If it's already fallen apart, it might not be prudent to do that. Cost is going to factor in what it's built on. So if it's built on a fully constructed foundation, fully footed foundation, or if it's just on like a slab of concrete, or if it's like a modular home, something like that. So there are a lot of factors. I hesitate to say no, they couldn't be, but it does take a lot of consideration. As far as, on the planning side, we'd have to look at the zoning, unless it was, a residential building going to another one. It does depend on a ton of different things. So honestly, all of our departments would probably have a say in that.
It would be a big undertaking if you wanted to move a building. Is that right? Is that fair to say?
For sure.
Yes. Okay, Ricky, back to you. We have so many questions from Allen Village School. Thank you, Mrs. Green. We appreciate that. Do you plan the parts of the city that are underground?
So yes and no. So we work with our public works department a lot, and they here at the city of Leawood, they're the ones that do like the utility works and make sure the sanitary sewers going one way, make sure everything's flowing downhill, and make sure that electricity is getting there through certain easements and stuff like that. So there is a certain planning that does have to go into what goes on underground, but that also goes into parking structures. That's a big thing for planners, trying to get parking instead of these giant parking lots that you see. How can you get them into a structure where you save a lot of that green space, and maybe make a park out of it or something like that? And so we deal with anything that's on the ground, below the ground, above the ground, anything that has to do with the actual project itself. We're in it 100%.
That's awesome. Real quick question for Chris as we're wrapping up here. I love the questions in the chat, though. This has been a lot of fun to be able to interact with students this way. So you alluded to this a little bit before, and we talked about destroying buildings, but can you rebuild a building if it's in ruins?
Yes, it's definitely more labor of love for sure. Fortunately, there are some usually some historic preservation tax credits or some sort of other incentive that you probably apply for something of that monumental of an undertaking. One example comes to mind: the KCMO school district had a bunch of buildings they just weren't using for a while. One in particular just gotten really, really poorly out of repair. But they were able to sell it to a developer who was able to rehab it and convert it into kind of a mixed-use condo building where the residents and there's some small retail developments. So working with the school district, the city, and that developer as kind of a big partnership agreement, again with their financing and all that in their design team, we're able to kind of save the structure. A lot of times you'll kind of see that where there's maybe a quote unquote ruin, but then there's kind of a modern expression on top of it or adjacent to it to kind of highlight that this is the historical character, and then this is the new structure that kind of brought back to life. So it stabilizes the old and kind of rebuilds the new using those historic assets.
That's great. So there's a lot of value in being able to preserve a building. And that kind of goes back to what you guys are doing now, is that you're trying to make sure that buildings are built correctly so that they last for a long, long time. If we put the foundations the way that they need to be, if we put the walls and the roofs and we do things right, then we're hoping those structures are going to be around for a long time. And then conversely, when it is time to work on those things, if we have to upgrade them in the future, we'll know that they're done with an orderly process and that they followed the rules and that that they can be rehabbed. Now, a lot of things change, though. We've had technology has taught us a lot in years, and that's why, Chris, when you talked about how the city has to go back and look at these codes every couple of years, it's because things change and materials for buildings change and things become more accessible and we learn a lot. So our techniques have changed, and that's what we hope gets incorporated in those buildings so that they do last for a long time. Well, I want to thank all of you for your participation today. Thank you for every student and for every question that you have submitted to us. This session's been a lot of fun. We really enjoy sharing the information with you about community development and careers. We hope that you'll consider this as an option for yourself, or at least explore some of the information that we have, some resources that are on our website. Our website is www.careerexpokc.org. It's up in the chat now, so that's available for you, and we are very grateful that you've spent time today with us. We hope you've learned something. Thank you to all of our planners and those that work to put the puzzle together for our communities every day. It's great hearing about the work that you do, and we appreciate you. So have a great day, everybody.